On January 21, 1924, the founder of the Soviet state, Vladimir Lenin, died at his country estate in Gorky. A few hours later, a special commission gathered in the Kremlin to outline the initial arrangements for the funeral. It was decided to transport Lenin's body from Gorky to Moscow. On a special mourning train, the coffin carrying the leader's body was delivered to the Paveletsky station, from where it was carried by hand to the Hall of Columns at the House of the Unions, where the official farewell took place over 5 days. On January 27th, the funeral took place in Moscow's Red Square. But Lenin's body was not committed to the earth. Instead, it was placed in a special wooden crypt. This was Lenin's first temporary mausoleum. The one standing in Red Square today is actually the third mausoleum. What secrets does it hold? Why was it built in the shape of a pyramid, and why does it have 5 corners? What lies inside the secret room? This and much more in today's story. The first discussions on what to do with Lenin's body began several months before his death, when it had already become obvious that the leader of the global proletariat was nearing his end. Here is what historian Alexander Shchusev shared about this.
In October 1923, at a Politburo meeting, the idea was first voiced that Lenin's body belongs to the people and must be preserved. The first to articulate this thought was Mikhail Kalinin, the formal head of the Soviet state. Everyone was against it, from Lenin's wife, Nadezhda Krupskaya, and Leon Trotsky, down to ordinary Politburo members. Only Stalin supported the idea, and no one else. After Lenin's death, the debates flared up with renewed vigor, but a rift appeared in the Politburo. Kalinin and Stalin were joined by the powerful head of the Comintern, Grigory Zinoviev. He proposed creating a Lenin town in Red Square, showcasing the stages of Lenin's life, with the mausoleum at its center. Millions of people, not just from Russia, would be able to visit it.
Also speaking in favor of preserving Lenin's body were the ruthless head of the secret police, Felix Dzerzhinsky, Minister of Foreign Trade, Leonid Krasin, and Stalin's closest allies, Vyacheslav Molotov and Kliment Voroshilov. According to the memoirs of architect Alexei Shchusev, on the day after Lenin's death, around midnight, he was summoned to the Hall of Columns at the House of the Unions, where members of the Soviet government were gathered, and was instructed to immediately begin building a temporary mausoleum. Within a few hours, Shchusev created a design for the crypt, and by the morning of January 23rd, following the approved sketch, he began constructing the wooden mausoleum near the Senate Tower of the Kremlin. The construction site was chosen between 2 mass graves created in November 1917. They held the remains of approximately 300 Bolsheviks who died during the armed seizure of power in Moscow. On this very spot in 1918, a rostrum had been installed where Bolshevik leaders, including Lenin, delivered speeches. In 1922, for the 5th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution, a cement sculpture of a worker by Friedrich Lect was installed in place of the rostrum. Photographs have survived showing the construction of the wooden mausoleum beginning right next to the worker. Before building the crypt, it was necessary to excavate over 50 cubic meters, about 1,800 cubic feet of frozen earth. At that time, temperatures in Moscow dropped to minus 30 degrees Celsius, roughly 22 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, and the ground was frozen so solid it had to be blasted with explosives. During the excavation, workers struck electrical cables and a sewer line. Because of this, the size of the pit had to be reduced, and the construction of the crypt's columns was abandoned. Parallel to the diggers' work, the crypt was being assembled on the square to be lowered into the excavated pit. The crypt was built in exactly 3 days. In shape, it was a 3-meter cube with a 3-tiered pyramid on top and the word Lenin on the facade made of black wooden blocks. On the edges of the mausoleum were 2 annexes for entrance and exit. From the right annex, a staircase descended 3 meters leading into the mourning hall, which was illuminated by 2 frosted chandeliers. The walls of the hall were draped in red fabric with black stripes resembling pilasters. On the ceiling was a hammer and sickle set against folds of red and black cloth. The left annex was purely decorative. It was planned to serve as an exit, but due to the underground utility lines, it was never completed. Why the Politburo chose Shchusev to build the mausoleum remains uncertain. He was, however, an incredibly talented and long-established architect. In 1897, Shchusev graduated with a gold medal from the St. Petersburg Academy of Arts. A few years later, commissioned by his mentor Kotov, he designed the iconostasis for the famous Kiev-Pechersk monastery. This attracted the attention of the Holy Synod, the governing body of the Russian Orthodox Church, and he received a series of commissions to design churches in his own neo-Russian architectural style. It is fair to assume that for Stalin, a former seminary student, it was important that the main shrine of the Bolsheviks be built by a church architect. In March 1924, a decision was made to embalm Lenin's body for long-term preservation using a new method developed by Professor Vorobyov and biochemist Zbarsky. On March 26th, the crypt was closed to the public and turned into a laboratory. Immediately, the government once again tasked architect Shchusev with rebuilding the crypt into a new, temporary wooden mausoleum, possessing a more monumental form with a tribune for speeches. Shchusev sifted through numerous options and consulted with the famous Danish archaeologist Frederick Poulsen, who provided drawings of the Pyramid of Djoser, the tomb of Cyrus the Great, and the Hellenistic Pergamon altar. According to Shchusev himself, he studied various forms of reliquaries and caskets. Ultimately, he managed to combine the Hellenic Pergamon with a traditional Russian timber palace, known as a terem. The stepped shape was retained, and tribunes were added on both sides of the entrance. By May 1, 1924, the main work was completed. The wooden mausoleum was painted olive green, and a small square enclosed by a cast-iron fence was laid out around it. Lenin's body was placed in a new crystal sarcophagus designed by Melnikov. However, it had a major flaw. The optical design of the sarcophagus was a disastrous failure. The leader's body reflected off the slanted glass panes like a mirror, and people walking past the sarcophagus saw not one, but 3 faces of Lenin simultaneously. To eliminate this, another sarcophagus was designed in the shape of an inverted trapezoid, but it would not be installed until much later, in 1945. For the time being, the second wooden mausoleum continued to serve as the tomb and stood until 1929. In January 1925, an international competition was announced for the design of Lenin's stone tomb. The commission received 117 proposals and sketches, ranging from completely unknown authors to famous master architects like Rudnev and Shechtel. But for the most part, these were wishes and ideas expressed by people with no architectural education. Out of the total number of submissions, the commission selected 25 projects. Among them, of course, stood out Shechtel's project of a giant pyramid with an enormous vaulted auditorium and a tribune. After reviewing the submissions, the commission rejected all of them. They decided to stick with the original design. Shchusev was simply ordered to rebuild his wooden mausoleum out of solid granite. But this task was not simple. If the mausoleum were set too close to the Senate Tower, it would be lost under the Kremlin walls, and if pushed too far forward, it would clash with St. Basil's Cathedral. Nevertheless, Shchusev found a solution by calculating a specific proportion relative to the Kremlin towers. He increased the height of the mausoleum to 12 meters, making it 1/3 the height of the Senate Tower and 1/6 the height of the Spasskaya Tower. He pushed the lower belt, featuring a mourning ribbon made of black granite, forward, thereby separating the mausoleum from the Kremlin wall, and merged its 3 fragmented tiers into one. Shchusev measured the dimensions literally with a ruler in hand. And to be absolutely certain of the calculations, before constructing the stone mausoleum, a full-size plywood replica was built. The new mausoleum was erected in 16 months by October 1930. The reinforced concrete frame was faced with red granite as well as black and gray labradorite. It was decided to make the inscription Lenin out of red granite set into black labradorite. A mineral block of the appropriate size was found in the Golovinsky quarry in the Zhytomyr region of Ukraine. The block, weighing 60 tons, was delivered to Moscow, first on a massive cart and then on a special railway flat car. On the left corner of the mausoleum, Shchusev applied his favorite technique. He softened the corner, creating an almost imperceptible asymmetry. Little did the architect know what conspiracy theories this so-called fifth corner would provoke among modern researchers. But there is no conspiracy here. Asymmetry in Shchusev's projects, where two sides of the same building are different, was his signature style. This particular trait of the architect's work led a number of researchers to believe that Shchusev was a Freemason. After all, in Masonic symbolism, two opposing columns must be different, just like in King Solomon's temple. In addition to visual softening, the so-called fifth corner served another function. It was meant to highlight the speaking orator. According to Shchusev's design, two tribunes were built on the mausoleum on the right and left corners. The architect considered putting a tribune in the middle to be blasphemy. How could one give a speech while standing directly over Lenin? The right tribune was intended for guests, the left for the leaders of the state, and it was this left side that Shchusev highlighted by softening the corner. But as the years went by, the number of leaders increased, and there was not enough room for everyone. The decision was made to create a central tribune located directly above the word Lenin carved in granite. By May 1, 1939, the construction of the new tribune was finished. In July 1941, exactly 1 month after Hitler invaded the Soviet Union, the Kremlin was subjected to its first massive bombing raid. 3 high-explosive aerial bombs fell on Red Square between the Mausoleum and the GUM department store, causing minor damage. It was decided to evacuate Lenin's body to Siberia, to the city of Tyumen, and to hide the mausoleum. On the advice of artists and architects, a house was sewn from canvas, complete with painted windows and doors, and the fabric was then stretched over a tubular frame erected directly over the mausoleum. Simultaneously, the stars on the Kremlin towers were extinguished and covered, the golden domes of the Kremlin cathedrals were painted over, and false windows and doors were painted on the Kremlin wall itself. A prominent landmark, the bend of the Moscow River, was jammed with barges and rafts and covered with camouflage netting. From above, the area now looked like a jumble of small, old buildings. The Kremlin and the mausoleum blended seamlessly into the surrounding structures. Only on the night of November 7, 1941, was the camouflage temporarily removed from the mausoleum for the historic military parade on Red Square. In March 1953, following Stalin's death, his body was placed inside Lenin's mausoleum. Replacing the multi-ton block bearing the inscription Lenin with a new one reading Lenin Stalin on such short notice was impossible. Instead, it was coated with pink resin and then painted over with black paint to spell out the inscription Lenin and Stalin. In the summer, everything looked fine, but in the winter, when the monolith was covered with frost, the old inscription Lenin bled through the stone. Only in 1960 were they able to carve a new monolith. The old block bearing the inscription Lenin was slated to be sawed into tombstones for the Golovinsky cemetery. However, the mausoleum's commandant, Colonel Moshkov, managed to save it by ordering it to be taken to a stone processing plant in Vodniki, where he asked the director to preserve the monolith. But it did not stay there for long. In October 1961, on Khrushchev's initiative, Stalin's body was removed from the mausoleum and buried near the Kremlin wall. The old monolith with the inscription Lenin returned to its rightful place, and the Lenin-Stalin slab was hauled away to a stone processing plant in Dolgoprudny. Perhaps the greatest mystery of the mausoleum is its secret room. It can be accessed from the corridor leading into the mourning hall. There on the wall is a Soviet coat of arms carved from stone, featuring 6 ribbons on the wreath, matching the number of Soviet republics at that time. To the left of the emblem is a barely noticeable opening. There is a door clad in copper sheets. Opening it, we enter that very room. It is small and narrow, resembling a long corridor. The entire room, from floor to ceiling, is made of polished labradorite. Almost everything is black, except for red rectangles on the floor. This room was designed by Shchusev as a columbarium. Built into one side are 4 large niches. Each can hold around 50 urns containing human ashes, depending on their size. But the columbarium is completely empty. Here is what Kremlin historian Sergei Devyatov, who visited this room in 2013, revealed.
Most likely, there wouldn't have been traditional urns, but rectangular boxes with ashes, bearing the names of the deceased carved into stone facades. Why the columbarium was closed off remains a mystery. No archival documents have survived. In theory, only Stalin personally could have ordered it closed. There is an assumption that it was shown to the General Secretary. He walked around, took a look, and delivered his verdict. Perhaps Stalin imagined how he himself would lie in this mausoleum after death, and did not want his associates to be in such close proximity to him. Since then, the secret room has never been mentioned anywhere, ever again. Stalin was truly the last of the country's rulers who knew about it. For everyone else, including Gorbachev, Medvedev, and Putin, the existence of a columbarium built into the mausoleum is as much a surprise as it is to you and me.
It must be noted that the internal layout of the mausoleum remains a state secret to this day. And who knows what other mysteries Lenin's tomb is hiding.